Yechaim, Thomas, Katharina, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of the Parliament, Your Excellencies. A few weeks ago I was at the site of these horrors myself. There are a number of pictures here from Be'eri, a community near Gaza that was hardest hit. 10% of its population was murdered. 40 people were kidnapped. I was there with a group of European parliamentarians, and I stood in the destroyed shelter of Vivian Silver. Vivian was a very well-known peace activist. She spent much of her life picking up Palestinian patients from Gaza and driving them to hospitals in Israel. And she ended her life in that very shelter where I was standing a few weeks ago, burned alive by Hamas. What do we owe Vivian? What do we owe the thousands of Israelis who have been murdered, raped, tortured, horrifically wounded and kidnapped? And what do we owe the Palestinian victims of the war that Hamas so brutally launched? And I believe we owe them at the very least the truth. And in that sense, UN Secretary General Guterres was right to say that these massacres did not occur in a vacuum. Only the true context is that these massacres happened amid decades of incitement to anti-Semitism, the glorification of terror as resistance, and the aspiration taught to little kids to die while killing Jews or martyrdom. It would be wonderful if it were really true that Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. The Palestinian research firm Avrat, and you can look it up on the internet, which is based in Ramallah, carried out a survey that showed that 75% of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza support very specifically the massacres that took place on October 7th. And this is also why, until today, the Palestinian Authority, the moderate, so-called moderate Palestinian Authority, hasn't condemned the attacks. Much of the mainstream Palestinian discourse is still built around the total rejection of any Jewish right to self-determination in the land. Far too many Palestinians seem to prioritize the destruction of the sovereignty of the Jews over creating their own sovereignty. This is also why time and again Palestinians have rejected the two-state solution and answered such concrete proposals with terror, such as in 2000 when the Palestinians rejected the Barack-Clinton proposal for a two-state offer. And in this context, we must also truthfully discuss the role that UNRWA plays. Instead of settling refugees from 1948, as the UNHCR does as part of its mandate for all the other world's refugees, the mandate of UNRWA is dedicated to perpetuating the refugee status of the Palestinians ad infinitum. Unlike all other refugees who are supposed to be settled, Palestinians can inherit their refugee status, and that's why we are confronted with the absurd situation that some 2/3 of the residents of Gaza are considered refugees, even though the vast majority of them, including their own parents and including their grandparents, were born in Gaza, which is supposedly part of a future Palestinian state. And they teach these poor children that it is their duty not to build and create a state in Gaza, but to return to the state of Israel, which of course is considered illegitimate. If you're thinking I'm exaggerating, please come to me afterwards. I can share with you videos after videos where children who are taught in UNRWA schools say in Arabic what they are being taught: to kill Jews, to destroy the state of Israel, and to return to their homes in Israel. So if we really want to bring about a peaceful solution after this war, we have to be truthful. And we have to be truthful, that means that we have to help much of the Palestinian society to de-radicalize. As the EU is currently reviewing its own funding, it must be more ambitious. It can't be enough to say that EU money cannot go to terrorists. Of course it must not go, or even though we know that it does so right now. As we know, the Palestinian Authority spends about 7 to 8% of its budget through the PLO to pay the salaries of convicted terrorists, including Hamas terrorists, including those that have now been apprehended for the crimes committed on October 7. They will be eligible for this money as well. And we know that EU money is going to NGOs affiliated with the PFLP, and so on and so on. It's also not enough to prevent EU money to go to incitement, even though it does, and it must stop as well. We know particularly famously the situation about the Palestinian textbooks, which are indirectly funded by the EU because we are paying the salaries of the teachers who have drafted these books and who are teaching from these books. It must, though, go much further than that. We must condition our aid to the Palestinian Authority and to NGOs on the condition that they positively promote peaceful coexistence. This shouldn't be controversial, but surprisingly it is. And this peaceful coexistence must be very concrete. We must hear it publicly and in Arabic, that they reject violence, that they reject terrorism, that they accept the right of the Jewish people to their state in the land of Israel, and they must reject the absurd right of return, which is simply code for the destruction of Israel, either in the best case demographically, but in the worst case violently. And this is also a burden and an obligation, not a burden, an obligation for the EU to say so publicly and clearly. There cannot and will never be a peace as long as Palestinians continue to believe in this illusion, and to leave them in this illusion is not a policy that promotes peace. A very last word just on the issue of anti-Semitism. We could have another 2-hour debate just on this issue, but if we just talk about the security, there are 2 steps that the EU must finally take. It must put the AJC on the EU terror list. Iran is behind Hamas, and we know very much, and every EU member state can have this information that the IRG is, as we speak right now, plotting on terror attacks against Jewish communities throughout Europe. And a message to Mr. Borrell: we all know there is a legal basis, and all we need is the political will to finally do it. The same, of course, applies to Hezbollah, Iran's most important proxy. We need to end these artificial distinctions between so-called military and political arm. There is only one Hezbollah, and Hezbollah itself rejects this artificial distinction. And last word, yes, Hamas is already on the EU terror list, but as far as I know, not a single one of its members is. And therefore, the French government had to freeze the accounts of the mastermind behind this October 7 massacre, Yahya Sawar. Shamefully, he is not on the EU terror list. The fact that he could have had a bank account in the EU is just outrageous, and I don't know how many other of these killers can freely operate in the EU. This must end as well. Thank you all for being here and bearing witness through these pictures. Thank you.